Okay, so hello everyone. This video is meant to briefly explain what flowcharts are, what are the parts of a flowchart, the common parts, and how they are used. So, um, just to briefly touch on flowcharts, I'm sure some of you are already familiar with how they are created, and probably some of you have already made flowcharts for your other subjects. This video is meant to be a sort of refresher to explain what flowcharts are. And for those who are not familiar, hopefully this will give you an idea of how you can create a flowchart of your system. So, what is a flowchart? A flowchart is a visual representation of a process. This can be a system process, a business process, this can be a task, or this can be a job that is done by you or your teammates. So it's not necessarily limited to presenting software or IT related processes. It can be also for more mundane tasks, such as, let's say, how you or your daily routine before going to school, how you make decisions on what tasks to do, what assignments to do. It can also be things such as how do you manage your home business or your family business, things like that. So it's not just limited to a software process, but it is commonly used for that purpose. It is meant to visualize how a system works, how different components of a system functions, and how they interact with the user and process information. So to start, I will just go over some of the most common parts. So let's start with the basic start and end. This is known as the start and end shape. It is in the form of an ellipsis. So let's put that there. So this shape is meant to signify the beginning or end of a process. Let's just label that start/end. Let's put that there. Okay, so this is meant to signify that this is the beginning or the end of your flowchart. Essentially, you will only place two of these in your flowchart. One beginning where the system will start or your process will start, and one end where the system will conclude or it will stop, it will finish processing all of its data and information. The next shape that is commonly used is this one here, which is a rectangle. So this is meant to represent a process or activity. So we can say activity, action, or process. In other words, whenever your system will modify data, it will uh, go through a algorithm, it will do an action, that is where you'll place, or that is what will be placed here. So for example, your system or your program is meant to add or is supposed to add two numbers, one x and y. So your x and y process will be done through this rectangular box here. What about inputs? So that's for processes. What about inputs and outputs? Let's say you want to get data from the user and you want to display data. For that, we will use the shape here, a parallelogram. Okay. So this is for input. Oops. Input and output. So essentially, this will allow you to enter data, or this will signify that you will be entering data into your system and you will be outputting data. So if you are using, let's say, a scanner to get input of numbers from your user, that will go here. And if you're going to use print line to display an output, that will also go here. Next up, we have, let's get the shape. Next up, we have a diamond. The diamond here represents what we call a decision. So this is meant to represent a decision. In other words, if you come across a point in your system where you can have multiple possible processes or outputs, that will be represented here. So for example, you let's say this is let's say this is currently our process. So let's just draw an arrow here. Let's just quickly draw an arrow. So let's say the user inputted some information, and depending on that input, the system can go one of two ways. That's what the decision uh, part or the decision shape will be used for. So for example, our output can be A or B. So in this case, we can draw two arrows rather, going to two different sections of our flowchart, meant to represent that, okay, depending on the input of the user, we could have two different ways that our system flow could go. Next up is the document symbol. So I don't think there's any specific shape available here. Sorry if it looks a bit crude. Okay, so this is meant to represent a document outputted by your system. This is somewhat similar to input and output, but it's more on documents. What we mean by documents, things such as Word files, PDFs, Excel files, that sort of thing, images. So if your system will output a soft copy or even a hard copy, that is what will be represented here in your or in the shape, the document shape. So if your system will be outputting a PDF as its final output or as part of its process, you will use this shape here. But you may be asking, what if my system or our system does not actually output any files? It just displays data and ends. Then you will only use this one here for showcasing data. You don't need to use this shape anymore. Okay? Take note, it's not required that you use every single shape available in the flowchart. Your flowchart will end up looking very messy and very complicated if you did that. You only need to use the shapes which are necessary to showcase your process. Next up, we have the shape here, which is a small circle. This shape is called a connector. So the idea for this shape is that it will allow you to connect one section of your flowchart to another section. Essentially, it allows you to split your flowchart into different parts, whether this is because your flowchart is too large to fit in one canvas, or it has complex steps which it goes through, or it connects to a completely different flowchart. That's what this is for. Normally, we use letters and numbers to signify the connector. So, for example, let's say we have letter A here. Let's draw an arrow. Oops. And then let's add another circle. There we go. Letter A. And then let us draw an arrow. So this is, oops, let's make that a bit straight. Now, this is how connectors are normally used. In this case, if you're going to use connectors, this can substitute as an end or start um, shape or a part. So let's say your flowchart ends here. This means that this will substitute as the end portion of your flowchart. You don't need to draw another one of these to signify the end. It is assumed or it is understood that this means that your flowchart currently ends here and will continue in another part or in another document. And then when you start that other document, you can make use of this. So this will now substitute as the start state. So from here, you can draw your process, you can draw a input, output, etc. So that's how you use the connector. It is meant to connect uh, flowcharts to another or to different areas or to different sections if in case your flowchart is too large or needs more space. And lastly, obviously, we have the arrows, which I have been drawing here and there throughout the canvas. So let's just use this. Okay, and then obviously these are arrows. So as it suggests, in whether it's in a uh, another type of flowchart or canvas or whatnot, arrows are meant to represent a flow of data. So in other words, what this means here is that from this process, the data here will go here to your input, which will then go to your decision, which will then go to the rest of your flowchart. So arrows are meant to represent a flow of information, a flow of steps, or a sequence of steps. So it's understood here that if you draw an arrow pointing from start to end, or from the start shape to the process, then this is it's understood that your system will start here and continue here and so on. Okay, so those are the basic shapes. Now you may see that you may see in the module that there are more than these uh, 7 shapes that I have listed. And if you look online, there is around 15 to 20 different shapes and different flowcharts which use completely different formatting. What I've discussed here is the most basic information needed. For most small systems, these shapes are sufficient. So you don't necessarily, as I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have to have a very complex flowchart. If you can explain it using only these, let's say these 4, then go ahead. You don't need to make use of all of these documents, connectors, mergers, etc. You can just use these 4 plus the arrows. Okay, so you don't and if possible, I'd like you guys to do that. You don't necessarily have to make your system overly complicated. Just focus on its main features and draw a flowchart of that. Okay, so that's it for this video.